This is Musicably Podcast. Welcome to Musicably, where music belongs to everyone. If you recognize that melody just now, and I suspect most of you did, you probably heard it first in a movie, or maybe in a television commercial, or maybe, if you are of a certain age, you heard it in a cinema in the dark, watching Clint Eastwood squint into a desert sun. What you may not know is that the whistle in Ennio Morricone's original score, that sound that has become one of the most recognized musical phrases of the 20th century, was not an afterthought. It was a deliberate compositional choice. Morricone understood something that most composers of his era had forgotten, that the human whistle, produced by nothing more than a pair of lips and a controlled breath, can carry emotion across an enormous distance. It can cut through an orchestral texture. It can stop a room. Today's episode is about that instrument, the one you were born with, the one that costs nothing, fits in your face, and has been with our species for longer than written language. Today we are talking about whistling. One of the first sounds I remember from my childhood was my father whistling. My Ocko, as we say in Slovak, had a great musical ear, a beautiful baritone, and a memory for songs that seemed to have no limit. But he did not have much luck in his life in terms of using those gifts for more than the enjoyment of himself and the people around him. His dream was to share his musicality with his children. And the first, most natural way to do that was to whistle. He whistled beautiful melodies on any suitable occasion, whenever we were around. Folk songs, popular tunes, classical themes. A whistled thread of sound moving through our home like something alive. When we talked about this years later, he explained his thinking to me. From the moment I was born, he had decided to give me as much music as possible. He knew that my mother and the other members of the family would naturally sing lullabies and children's songs, so he chose a different path. He focused on pure melody, no words, no text, just the musical line itself. For him, that was music in its most essential form. I am glad to say that my Ocko succeeded. Most of my life has been dedicated to music, and I see his legacy continuing when I watch my own children singing and playing. A whistled melody, offered freely and without ceremony, turned out to be one of the most powerful musical gifts one person can give another. Not because it was spectacular, but because it was constant. It was simply there, woven into ordinary life, not saved for special occasions. The very first proper concert I ever attended, by the way, was a whistler, a fabulous Hungarian musician named Tamás Haki, performing with his band. I was a teenager. I had no framework for understanding what I was witnessing. I only knew that a man was standing on a stage producing music from his lips, and that the audience was completely still. I've never forgotten it. So, let me ask you the question that has been on my mind. What has happened to the art of musical whistling? I can produce a whistle in 4 different ways, and I can whistle a complicated melody with ease. But I rarely hear other people whistle anymore. Even at concerts or sporting events, here in North America, people seem to prefer shouting. The piercing, joyful sound of a whistle which was once as natural as applause across much of Europe, has almost disappeared. Something has slipped away quietly without anyone quite deciding to let it go. I decided to research this because I believe whistling is exactly the kind of musicking activity that musicably exists to restore. It is simple, it is human, it is healthy, and it is disappearing from our lives at precisely the moment we need it most. Let me tell you what I found. Whistling is one of the oldest human musical acts we know of. Archaeologists have found animal bone whistles dating back tens of thousands of years. That tells us that early humans were already fascinated with the relationship between breath, shape, and sound long before anything we would recognize as civilization. But human lip whistling, the act itself, no instrument required, is almost certainly older still. It costs nothing. It leaves no archaeological trace. It needs only a pair of lips, a breath, and a moment of stillness. The physics are actually elegant. When you force air through a small opening shaped by your lips, the air vibrates. Your mouth cavity acts as a resonant chamber, shaping and amplifying the sound. Adjust your tongue position, and the pitch rises or falls. The whole instrument fits in your face. Every human being is born carrying it. For most of human history, people used this instrument constantly. Shepherds in the Canary Islands developed a complete whistled language called Silbo Gomero, capable of carrying complex messages across mountain valleys that a shouted voice could never reach. It is now a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage, still taught in schools on the island today. In Turkey, a similar whistled language survives in remote highland villages. Across Central Asia, the Americas, and Sub-Saharan Africa, whistling served as long-distance communication, ritual signal, and everyday music all at once. I discovered a wonderful musical gem while researching for this episode. There is a song by the English madrigal composer John Bennett, written at the end of the 16th century, called Venus Birds. It has been recorded by one of the finest countertenors of our time, Andreas Scholl, and in that recording, 4 centuries old in its composition, he also whistles. This is not a new idea, this is ancient. Closer to our own era, there was a genuine golden age for artistic whistling, roughly the 1920s to the 1950s, when professional whistlers known as siffleurs performed with big bands, recorded albums, and filled concert halls on both sides of the Atlantic. Agnes Woodward opened the California School of Artistic Whistling in 1909. Her students included, among others, Bing Crosby and Pat Boone. Even Thomas Edison's earliest phonograph demonstrations relied heavily on whistling. The recorded human voice was still too weak to carry clearly, but a whistle? A whistle reproduced perfectly. The whistle, you could say, launched the recording industry. Then, gradually, it faded. Not because it was banned, not because anyone decided it was wrong. It simply stopped being passed down. The tradition that my father carried so naturally, the tradition of moving through your daily life with melody in it, became rare, then unusual, then almost invisible. Now, let me tell you something that surprised me when I looked into the science. At the most basic physiological level, whistling is controlled breathing. When you whistle, your diaphragm engages, your airflow steadies, and your body moves into a state that is measurably calmer than the anxious, shallow breathing of a difficult workday. There is a great deal of research now on something called vagus nerve stimulation, the body's primary mechanism for shifting from a stressed state to a relaxed one. And what that research consistently shows is that controlled breath based activities, humming, singing, and yes, whistling, activate exactly this pathway. The person whistling softly to themselves in a corridor is not just making pleasant sound, they are, without knowing the terminology, performing an active piece of self regulation. They are telling their nervous system, we are fine, we can proceed. At the psychological level, whistling does something that very few other musical acts manage. It carries almost no performance anxiety. Think about this for a moment. Millions of people carry a deep and painful shame about their singing voice. They were told at some point by a teacher, a parent, a thoughtless peer that they could not sing. That memory lodged and stayed. Nobody has ever been told they cannot whistle. Nobody has ever walked out of a room feeling humiliated because their whistle was imperfect. Whistling exists almost entirely outside of the performance frame. It is breathy, in the best possible sense of that word. It announces itself without demanding attention. It offers melody without asking for evaluation. This is not a small thing. It means that whistling is one of the lowest friction entries into daily musical life available for any human being. You do not need lessons to start. You do not need an instrument. You do not need privacy, though a tiled corridor with good reverb certainly helps. You need only a breath and the memory of a melody you love. Here is what I believe actually happened to whistling. It was not replaced by anything better. It was gradually made to feel unnecessary, and then slightly presumptuous. As recorded music became available in every pocket, as professional performance set an ever higher standard for what real music was supposed to sound like, the informal musical life of ordinary people quietly contracted. Whistling down a corridor became to feel like an imposition, like you were performing unrequested in a world that already had plenty of professional sound available on demand. This is the same cultural shift that gave us the phrase, I am not musical. Think about the phrase for a moment. I am not musical. It would have been almost incomprehensible to most humans across most of history. Of course, you are musical. Everyone was musical. Everyone sang, drummed, hummed, whistled, not as a performance, not as a career, but as a natural expression of being human and being alive. The idea that music making belongs only to those with formal training, with exceptional talent, with a certain kind of courage, that is a recent and, I would argue, genuinely damaging invention. Whistling disappeared as a casualty of that same shift. It was not silenced, it was simply never given the permission to continue. So, here is what I want to suggest to you today, simply and directly. Start whistling again, or start for the first time. If you cannot yet produce a clear tone, Here is the most common starting point. Wet your lips. Form a small round opening, not too tight, not too loose. Place the tip of your tongue lightly before your lower teeth, and then blow a gentle, steady stream of air through that opening. Small adjustments to the shape of your lips and the position of your tongue will find the note. It may take a few minutes, it may take a few days, but the moment it arrives, you will know it, because you will feel it in your whole chest. Once you have a tone, melodies will follow. Slide slowly between two notes, then add a third. Whistle a fragment of something you love. A folk tune, a lullaby, a phrase from a piece of music that has mattered to you. Look for a melody with a clear arc, something flowing and lyrical rather than heavily rhythmic. 2 bars of something beautiful is worth far more than an ambitious attempt at a full song that frustrates you into stopping. And when you find yourself in a reverberant space, a staircase, a tiled corridor, a stone hall, let the room do what it was built to do. Your whistle will bloom in those spaces in a way that will genuinely surprise you. Hard surfaces reflect the sound back to you, enriched and sustained. Suddenly, you sound, to your own ears, like something approaching the musicians you admire. Then take it outside, into your day, into your walk to the coffee machine, your moment waiting for the elevator, your quiet Tuesday afternoon. Not as a performance, not as a statement, just as a person moving through their life with melody in it. My father knew something that most of the modern world has forgotten, that music does not need a stage. It needs only a person willing to let it happen. He gave me that understanding through 1,000 whistled melodies before I was old enough to name what I was receiving. I am still receiving it. And I believe, with everything that Musicably is built on, that you can receive it too. If this episode has stirred something in you, a memory, a curiosity, or maybe just the sudden urge to try, I would love to hear about it. The full blog post that accompanies this episode goes a little deeper into the history and the science, and you can find it on the Musicably website at musicably.com. And if you would like to stay connected, to receive new posts, new episodes, and occasionally thoughts on musicking as they develop, I would warmly invite you to sign up for the Musicably newsletter. No noise, no clutter, just music, and the ideas around it. A future episode will go further into the practical techniques, the different ways to produce a whistle, how to develop range and control, and how to begin bringing melody into a whistle you may not yet fully trust. That one is coming. Until then, whistle something today. Anything. Even if no one hears it but you. I'm Palo Beka. This is Musicably. Music is your birthright. See you next week.